My name is Alana Brooks, and for the last 3 years, apartment 3B in a modest brick building on Franklin Avenue, Brooklyn, had been my safe haven. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom with creaky floors, stubborn windows, and a radiator that sang sad jazz in the winter. But it was mine. I worked hard for it. I earned every square inch. I'm 27, single, and hustling my way through life as a freelance graphic designer. The kind of work that pays well some months and leaves you praying over late invoices the next. I kept a part-time job at an independent bookstore just to keep things steady, even though it barely covered groceries. Rent was my biggest expense, but I paid it on time, every time. I wasn't the kind of tenant landlords had to worry about. Quiet, clean, responsible. And that apartment? It represented more than shelter. It was freedom. After escaping a toxic relationship with my ex, Marcus, a man who believed control was the same as love, I found peace behind those chipped white walls. That place heard my sobs at 2 a.m. when I thought I'd never rebuild. It witnessed my small victories, landing my first big client, painting my own walls seafoam green, baking cookies that turned out edible for once. It was the first place that was truly mine. My landlord, Harold Kessler, was an enigma. In his early 60s, balding with greasy combed-over hair and khaki pants that had seen too many summers, Harold was rarely seen in person. His communications were cold, always through clipped emails or half-legible sticky notes taped to the door. He owned several properties, and rumor had it he was trying to sell off some to a development firm looking to convert them into luxury condos. Still, he never said anything to me directly. That was until the day things started to feel off. It began with a slip of paper. I came home from work at the bookstore, exhausted from inventory day and craving the leftover takeout I'd been dreaming about all afternoon. As I climbed the steps, I noticed a folded notice taped to my door. It wasn't in an envelope, just flapping like a warning in the wind. It read, 30-day notice to vacate, tenant noncompliance. Due to repeated violations of lease agreement, you are hereby instructed to vacate the premises no later than April 30th. H. Kessler, property owner. I blinked at it. Noncompliance? What violations? I hadn't even had friends over in months. I separated my recycling. I paid rent by auto transfer. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through bank records. Rent had cleared. Every single month. A cold wave of anxiety crept through my chest. Was this some mistake? A clerical error? I called the number on the bottom of the notice. Voicemail. Of course. I left a message, polite but firm, asking for clarification. The next day, no reply. Instead, I came home to a for sale sign hammered into the grass outside our building. That's when I felt the first shiver of dread. I spoke with Mrs. Ortega, my elderly neighbor from 3C. She'd lived there 25 years and knew every face that came through the building. He's trying to push us all out, she whispered, voice low, as though the walls themselves had ears. Offered me $3,000 to leave. I told him I'm not going anywhere. This is home. My stomach twisted. I wasn't imagining it. Something was happening, and it wasn't just me. Harold had a plan, and we weren't part of it. Still, I tried to convince myself it would sort itself out. I emailed Harold again. I printed my lease, highlighted the terms. I made copies of every rent payment. I organized a folder just in case. But the silence from him was deafening. Then came the day I found a strange man in the hallway. It was a Tuesday morning. I had just finished a Zoom client call when I opened my door to take out the trash. A man in a leather jacket and clipboard was walking through the hall, scribbling notes and taking photos of the walls. Hey, can I help you? I asked, gripping the bag tighter. He barely looked up. Just here for inspection. Inspection? By who? Kessler. Said the building's going through some updates. He didn't offer a business card. He didn't even seem concerned about hiding the fact he had no uniform, no ID, and no reason to be there. He left as quickly as he arrived, but my nerves were shot. When I tried to call Harold again, the number was disconnected. That night, I couldn't sleep. My safe place, the little world I'd fought to build, was unraveling. I sat on the couch, surrounded by sticky notes and documents, heart pounding in my ears. Something wasn't right, and I wasn't going to let it slide. By Wednesday, I was done waiting for answers. I took the entire day off from freelance work and marched to the Brooklyn Housing Court Information Center. The building felt overwhelming, cold gray walls, worn-out chairs, people shuffling in and out with defeated eyes. But I wasn't here to crumble. I was here to learn. At the help desk, a kind but exhausted-looking woman named Trina listened as I explained my situation. I handed her a copy of the notice to vacate. She raised an eyebrow. "This isn't legal," she said flatly. "There's no court date, no signature from a judge, no certified mailing. He can't just throw you out like this." A tight knot I hadn't realized I'd been holding finally loosened. But her next words brought it right back. "Still, that doesn't mean he won't try." Trina explained that New York had strict tenant protections, but landlords like mine use scare tactics to bluff people into leaving. She handed me a pamphlet on illegal eviction practices and scribbled the name of a nonprofit tenants advocacy group, Shelter Rights Collective.
"Call them," she said.
"You're gonna need backup." That night, I reached out to Shelter Rights. A woman named Kendra, a fiery advocate with the voice of someone who'd seen it all, called me back the next morning. "He's trying to clear out the building before the fiscal quarter," she said. "Probably promised the developer an empty property. You're not the first one to call us about Harold Kessler." Hearing his name roll off her tongue so casually sent a chill down my spine. Kendra offered to connect me with a lawyer and advised me to start building a case. Document every interaction, collect tenant statements, and above all, don't move out. He wants you gone because you're in his way. But now you know your rights, Solana. You're not powerless. Empowered, I started canvassing the building. I knocked on Mr. Hanley's door. He lived on the top floor and was rarely seen. He answered cautiously, but when I explained what was happening, he nodded gravely. "He offered me $5,000 if I left in 2 weeks," he said, voice low. "Said he'd cut off my heat if I didn't." Mrs. Ortega told me she'd found rat traps in the hallway, even though she'd never seen rats before. 2 other tenants had received notices just like mine, handwritten or printed, taped to doors without warning. And then there was Simone, the single mother on the ground floor. She burst into tears the moment I mentioned Harold. He said if I didn't leave by next month, he'd call CPS and report that my son was in danger because of a hazardous unit. He made it sound so real. I was stunned. It wasn't just me. Harold was using fear, manipulation, and intimidation to force people out. And now I was angry. I started organizing. I created a group chat with the remaining tenants. I scanned and compiled every document, every voice note, every photograph of suspicious hallway damage or strange contractors. I wrote a timeline of events and built a folder titled Tenant Harassment Evidence, Kessler. Kendra helped me file an official tenant harassment complaint with the city's Housing Preservation and Development Department. Meanwhile, her contact, attorney Rachel Lynn, a sharp, no-nonsense housing lawyer, agreed to take my case pro bono. But Harold wasn't sitting idle. One morning, I woke to find my electricity flickering, and by noon, it was out completely. I called Coned, and they confirmed that the account had been terminated by the property owner. I nearly screamed. I charged my phone at the bookstore and slept at Simone's for the night, since she still had power. But something in me had clicked. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to be pushed into the shadows. That same night, I posted a TikTok video, a calm but firm 2-minute clip explaining what was happening, tagging local housing justice accounts, calling out Harold by name, and inviting anyone who had been through similar to message me. I didn't expect much. By morning, it had over 30,000 views. People shared stories. Former tenants from other buildings Harold owned commented about being harassed out, threatened, even stalked. A local reporter from the Brooklyn Ledger reached out, asking if I'd go on record. I agreed. Under one condition, they interview multiple tenants, not just me. The article ran 2 days later. Brooklyn tenants say landlord uses illegal tactics to force evictions before sale. It had screenshots.
Quotes.
A photo of the for sale sign. I printed 3 copies and taped one to the mailboxes, one to my door, and one to the vacant lobby wall Harold always ignored. By the following week, an inspector from the city showed up, clipboard in hand. He looked over my apartment and wrote several violations: lack of heat during colder nights, electricity cutoff, failure to maintain property code. We weren't just exposing Harold. We were cornering him. But the fight wasn't over. That weekend, a notice slid under my door. It was typed this time, with better formatting and a court date. Harold had filed a formal eviction lawsuit, claiming I was hostile and unlawfully occupying the unit. He had finally come out of the shadows. But so had I. And I had proof. Witnesses. A legal team. A paper trail. I read the notice, exhaled slowly, and smiled. It was time to take this to court. The morning of my first court hearing arrived like thunder. I stood outside the Kings County Housing Court, clutching a folder so thick it could stop a bullet. Inside it, printed emails, digital screenshots, witness statements, maintenance complaints, rent receipts, photographs, and the article from the Brooklyn Ledger. A case I had built like armor. I wasn't alone. Rachel Lynn, my lawyer, walked beside me, tall, sharp-suited, and cool as winter. Simone had offered to testify. Mr. Hanley had agreed to submit a signed affidavit. Mrs. Ortega, in her late 70s, even brought photos of the hallway mold Harold never addressed. We weren't just tenants now. We were witnesses. We were fighters. In the waiting area, I saw him. Harold Kessler. He looked smaller than I remembered. Same khakis, same comb-over, but something was different now. Maybe it was the look in his eyes. Restless. Irritated. Like a man who had always gotten his way and finally sensed that was changing. He didn't acknowledge me. Fine by me. When our case was called, Rachel rose smoothly, documents in hand. Harold's attorney, a jittery man with too many papers and not enough confidence, struggled to catch up. The judge, a stern but fair woman named Judge Martinez, began by reviewing Harold's claim. Alana Brooks has failed to comply with lease obligations and has become a hostile resident, disturbing the peaceful operation of the building, she read from his complaint. Rachel stood. We categorically deny those accusations. In fact, we intend to show that Ms. Brooks is a victim of a coordinated effort by the landlord to illegally evict rent-stabilized tenants for personal financial gain. I held my breath. She started presenting the evidence.
Timeline.
Rent records. Photos of the faulty wiring and heating. The illegally cut electricity. The for sale sign. The unannounced inspections. The notices with no court orders. And then the article. The judge's brow furrowed. Is this an official media publication? Yes, Your Honor. With statements from multiple tenants. Harold's lawyer objected weakly. Hearsay. It's not hearsay if they're here, Rachel replied, nodding to the back row. Simone, Mrs. Ortega, and Mr. Hanley all raised their hands in turn. Judge Martinez called a recess and requested a follow-up hearing date. But her closing remark was loud and clear. Mr. Kessler, you are advised to cease all direct contact with tenants involved in this case and to restore any cut services immediately. Tampering with utilities may constitute harassment under New York housing law. That was a warning, and we heard it loud and clear. When we exited the courtroom, I felt a wave of relief. But Rachel didn't relax. She leaned over and whispered, He's cornered Alana. But a man like that? He might try something desperate. She was right. The very next night, someone rang my buzzer after 10 p.m. When I answered, no one was there. But taped to the front door was a new notice. Not from Harold. From some entity called King's Property Holdings, LLC. It read, This building is scheduled for immediate redevelopment. All current tenants are advised to vacate before demolition permits are approved. I felt the paper crumple in my fist. He had created a shell company, likely himself behind it, and was now using fake documentation to scare people. I scanned the paper. Reverse searched the LLC. Sure enough, the company had been formed just 2 weeks ago. I forwarded it to Rachel. Her reply, Good. He's making mistakes now. Keep everything. The next few days blurred into a chess game. Harold filed 2 more motions, both denied. His lawyer attempted to push our court date back, but Rachel objected successfully. Meanwhile, I launched a community awareness campaign. Flyers in laundromats, posts in Facebook groups, a digital document on how to recognize illegal eviction tactics. I got over 400 shares. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was defending people who didn't know they had a voice. But it wasn't easy. There were nights I broke down. Nights I stared at the ceiling and asked, what if I lose? What if I'm making it worse for everyone? But then I'd get a message from someone like Jasmine, a woman in Harlem, saying, thank you. Your story helped me realize I was being threatened illegally too. Every time I wanted to give up, someone else handed me a reason not to. 3 days before the final hearing, something unexpected happened. I received an offer, emailed directly from Harold's lawyer. In light of the emotional stress endured by both parties, our client is willing to drop the eviction suit in exchange for a mutual agreement that Ms. Brooks vacate the property within 30 days. A $7,000 relocation stipend will be provided. This offer is confidential and non-negotiable. Rachel laughed when she saw it. He knows he's going to lose. But I didn't laugh. I stared at that dollar amount, and for a brief moment, I hesitated. $7,000. That was 3 months' rent, maybe 4 if I tighten my budget. I could move out. I could finally sleep. I could escape the stress. But then I thought about Mrs. Ortega,
Simone,
Mr. Hanley, and about the other buildings I'd heard about, tenants who didn't have lawyers or media articles or thousands of TikTok views. I wrote back one sentence. Absolutely not. The final hearing felt different. It wasn't nerves anymore. It wasn't fear. It was resolve. I stood outside the courthouse in a navy blue blazer I borrowed from Simone, heels grounded on the sidewalk like I was rooted to the earth itself. Behind me were the people Harold had underestimated. Mrs. Ortega with her cane and quiet fire, Mr. Hanley carrying an envelope of printed records, and Simone with her son in a Spider-Man hoodie holding a juice box. We looked like a family. And in a way, we were. Inside the courtroom, Rachel Lynn sat beside me, cool and ready. Harold slumped in the far corner with his lawyer, red-faced and whispering too much. He looked like a man unraveling. He didn't even pretend to make eye contact this time. Judge Martinez took her seat, flipping through the hefty case file. I've reviewed the filings, supporting evidence, and testimony affidavits submitted by Ms. Brooks and other tenants. Today we'll proceed with direct testimony and cross-examinations. Rachel called me first. As I took the stand, my palms were slick, but my voice held steady. I walked through everything. How the notice appeared with no legal documentation, how my electricity was cut, the mysterious LLC flyer, the intimidation tactics, the conversations with neighbors. Rachel showed screenshots and rent receipts. The judge nodded along, taking notes. Then came the twist. Rachel turned to the court clerk. I'd like to introduce a set of records obtained through the New York Division of Corporations. On the screen, a document appeared. King's Property Holdings, LLC, formed March 3rd. Registered agent, H. Kessler. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Kessler, are you aware that this LLC, used to issue notices to tenants in your building, was registered in your name? Harold's lawyer stood up, stammering, We object, this wasn't, my client didn't. Judge Martinez held up a hand. It's a matter of public record. Sit down. Harold's face turned crimson. I felt something shift in the room. The power dynamic reversed just like that. The predator had just become the exposed liar. Rachel wasn't finished. We also have statements from 5 other former tenants of Mr. Kessler's other properties. They describe similar tactics, threats, cut utilities, false violations. We believe this is part of a larger pattern of harassment aimed at displacing tenants for financial gain. The judge nodded slowly. Then she turned to Harold. Do you have anything to say in response to these allegations? Harold stood. For the first time, I saw panic behind his bravado. I run a business, Your Honor. I manage multiple properties. These people, these tenants, they cause problems. They make it hard to. Judge Martinez raised her voice. They make it hard for you to commit illegal evictions, Mr. Kessler? Is that what you were about to say? Silence. I've seen landlords like you before. You think fear is cheaper than process. But this court doesn't tolerate intimidation tactics. You've abused your position, your authority, and the law. She turned to Rachel. The court finds sufficient evidence to not only dismiss this eviction case with prejudice, but also to refer the matter to the Department of Housing Preservation and the State Attorney General's Office for investigation into landlord harassment. I sat frozen. The words echoed.
Dismissed.
With prejudice. Referred for investigation. I had done it. When the gavel hit the wood, Harold didn't wait. He shoved past the pews, storming out like a child denied his favorite toy. But this wasn't a tantrum. It was defeat. Outside the courthouse, Simone hugged me first. Then Mrs. Ortega, then Hanley. Rachel smiled for the first time that day. You didn't just win your case, Alana. You made him visible. That's powerful. We stood on the courthouse steps as a second reporter arrived. This time from New York 1, asking for a brief interview. I agreed, but I made it about all of us, not just me. There are thousands of tenants in this city who don't know they have rights, I told the camera. People like Harold Kessler rely on that fear. But knowledge is power. And we're not afraid anymore. That night, I returned home to apartment 3B, flipping the light switch on with pride. The electricity worked again. The building was quiet, but something felt new. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't surviving. I was standing tall. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of wine, and stepped out onto the tiny balcony. Below me, Franklin Avenue buzzed with life. I took a deep breath. I had turned the tables. The day of the hearing arrived, and I could barely sleep the night before. My nerves were on edge, but I reminded myself, I wasn't just some helpless tenant anymore. I was a woman armed with truth, evidence, and fire. I wore a navy blue pantsuit, something that made me feel powerful yet grounded. As I entered the courtroom, my heart thumped against my ribs like a war drum. Across the room sat Brad, still arrogant, dressed in a charcoal gray suit like he was the one being wronged. His lawyer, some smug middle-aged man, barely looked my way. But what they didn't know was that I had more than just a sob story. I had a legal arsenal. The judge, an older black woman named Judge Thomas, called our case, and suddenly the courtroom felt smaller. Brad's lawyer began, painting a story of a problematic tenant who had refused to pay rent and violated multiple clauses of release. His tone was dripping with condescension. He even tried to suggest I was running some sort of freelance business out of the apartment and that I had guests coming in and out all hours. Then it was my turn. I stood up, palms slightly clammy, and took a deep breath. Your Honor, I began, voice steady. This is not just a case of a lease dispute. This is about a landlord who tried to use his power to intimidate and displace a tenant for his own benefit. I submitted all the documents. Screenshots of our text messages, the sudden rent increase notice, the incorrect eviction notice with no court filing, and my trump card, a video I had recorded when Brad admitted he didn't have legal grounds but was sick of dealing with tenants who can't take a hint. Judge Thomas watched the clip intently, then raised her eyes to Brad, whose face was now frozen in shock. Mr. Harper, she said slowly, are you aware that retaliatory eviction is not just unethical, it's illegal? He stammered, I didn't mean it like that. Her gavel came down with a sharp thud. Case dismissed. Miss Collins, you may remain in your apartment. And Mr. Harper, you'll be hearing from the housing department. I walked out of that courtroom lighter than air. I thought the courtroom win would be the end of it. I could breathe again, sleep peacefully, and finally focus on work without fear of being thrown out of my home. But what I didn't expect was what happened next. 2 weeks after the hearing, I got a letter in the mail. Not from Brad, not from court, but from the city housing department. It was an official notice saying they had opened an investigation into Brad Harper based on multiple tenant complaints and recent court findings. Apparently, I wasn't the only one he had tried this nonsense with. Curious, I reached out to the building's tenant group, which, embarrassingly, I'd ignored all year. They welcomed me with open arms. Turned out, Brad had a long track record of harassing single women tenants, threatening low-income residents, and refusing to fix basic things like heating or plumbing unless someone reminded him who owned the building. Sickening. We started gathering our stories. 5 other tenants stepped forward. One had mold in her ceiling for 6 months. Another had been locked out of her own unit after a verbal argument with Brad. A mother of 2 had her heating turned off mid-December because she missed a payment, when in reality, Brad had lost her check on purpose. With the help of a tenant rights nonprofit, we organized a formal complaint. The nonprofit also helped us file a class action lawsuit. That's when the local news caught wind of the case. One Thursday evening, I was sitting in my living room, still mine, thankfully, when my face flashed across the 6 o'clock news. They showed clips from the court hearing and even the text messages Brad had sent me. Landlord targeted tenant in retaliation attempt, the anchor read aloud. Brad tried to deny everything, but the public pressure, the footage, and the tenant complaints made it impossible. A month later, the city issued a fine and temporarily suspended his landlord license. The building was handed over to a third-party management company while the investigation continued. That apartment I once feared I'd lose? It became ground zero for something bigger. I wasn't just a tenant anymore. I was part of a movement. The power I once thought Brad had over me, it vanished the day I realized I could fight back and win. And I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was leading. With the support of the tenant nonprofit, I started hosting monthly workshops in the community room. Yes, the same one Brad used to lock unless someone paid a fee. We educated renters about their rights, what to document, how to recognize retaliatory behavior, and the importance of keeping written records. People who had once been scared to speak up began stepping forward. Their voices, once quiet, grew louder by the week. I was invited to speak at a housing rights panel in Brooklyn. Standing on that stage, looking out at a packed room filled with people just like me, tenants, advocates, even city officials, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Ownership. Not just of my apartment, but of my voice, my story, my truth. Even my company took notice. My boss, Gina, who had always supported me silently, nominated me for a Community Impact Award. I was stunned.
Me?
The girl who almost lost her apartment to an arrogant landlord? And then came the biggest surprise of all. Brad tried to sell the building. Word had gotten out that it was a PR nightmare, and no one wanted to touch it. Eventually, it was bought by a local cooperative development group, one that believed in rent stabilization, repairs, and transparency. When they asked if I'd consider joining the tenant advisory board, I didn't hesitate. The girl who once felt powerless and panicked now had a seat at the table. My apartment, that little one-bedroom in the heart of Queens, didn't just remain mine. It became my anchor, my classroom, my war room, and finally, my triumph. Sometimes I sit by the window with my cup of tea, watching life bustle down the street, and I smile. Not because it all worked out easily, but because I didn't run. I didn't fold. I fought. Brad underestimated me. He thought I'd just go quietly. But instead, I turned the story around, one email, one court date, one truth at a time. If you're in the middle of something like this right now, scared, confused, feeling like your world is tilting off its axis, I want you to hear this loud and clear. You are not powerless. I used to believe the person who held the lease or owned the building had all the control. But what I learned is that the truth, the law, and your voice, they matter more than fear. What landlords like Brad count on is your silence, your shame, your exhaustion. Don't give it to them. Document everything. Every message, every phone call, every chance encounter where they make threats or try to intimidate you. Write it all down.
Take pictures.
Keep emails. Build a record like your future depends on it, because sometimes it does. Get help. Call legal aid. Contact your local tenant union. Even if it feels like you're screaming into the void, keep reaching out. You're not alone, even if it feels that way. There are people and organizations who fight for folks just like us every single day. I found my strength when I found my people. And don't underestimate the power of knowledge. The laws are meant to protect tenants, but most of us don't even know what those protections are. I didn't. I had to dig, ask questions, stay up late reading legal jargon I barely understood. But it paid off. I turned the very laws Brad ignored into the sword I used to hold him accountable. Now, when I walk through the halls of my building, people stop me. They ask for advice. They say, "Aren't you the one who stood up to Brad?" And I smile, not because I wanted the spotlight, but because I finally found the courage to say, "Yes, I am." So if you're facing an illegal eviction, harassment, or being bullied into silence, don't just pack up and disappear. You have a right to stand your ground. Because no one, not even a smug landlord with a clipboard and a fake smile, gets to decide your worth. You're stronger than you think. And trust me, there's nothing more satisfying than turning the tables on someone who thought they could crush you. You don't just survive this. You rise.